Welcome back to another GeekaWhat video, and in today's video I'm reviewing ASUS X299-E Republic of Gamers Gaming Strix Motherboard. Now, I recently ordered a video on MSI's X299 Gaming Pro Carbon Motherboard, the video for which can be found in the card section. Now, without any further ado, let's get straight into the review. This X299 board with the Strix branding sits slightly at the more affordable end of AMD's X299 lineup. We've seen the Strix motherboard branding become more famous and more prominent through the X370 and of course Z270 motherboard releases, for which Strix made several appearances. This is by far one of the best aesthetically designed motherboards I think I've ever seen. It looks incredible, from the matte black soft touch plastic to the dark silver gloss black accents. It looks incredible. The RGB isn't overdone, but sits there nicely, and the Republic of Gamers branding is nice and prominent. The motherboard looks fantastic with LEDs off or on, and the Black Republic of Gamers logo, in my opinion, on the chipset cooler looks incredible. But before I get too hung up on the design, let's take a look around the layout of the motherboard. Now, it's got everything you'd expect from an LGA 2066 motherboard. You've got that big LGA 2066 socket in the middle with 4 RAM DIMMs on either side. Now, one thing you will have to note with these X299 based CPUs is that the quad-core model, so the Cable 8X chips, actually aren't compatible with quad-channel memory. So if you get certain CPUs, the 2 quad-core models in this lineup, which I really advise you don't buy, going for something at the higher end or drop down to RGA 1151 or Ryzen 7, then you aren't actually going to be able to use half of the RAM DIMMs. You can use the right hand side, channel C and D, but not the left hand side, and it does come with a notice for that to inform you in case you missed it. Below that, we of course have the PCIe lanes. Once again, what you can use and in what variety is going to vastly depend on your CPU choice. The lower 2 models I mentioned just a moment ago only have 16 PCIe lanes, which really is going to hamper you. That being said, all the lanes are PCIe Gen 3 variety and come in the following order: X16, X1, X1, X16, X4 and X8. Storage support on this motherboard is also pretty good. You've got 8 SATA 3 6GB/s ports, which of course do support RAID 1, 0, 5 and 10 for increased performance or reliability, or both depending on the RAID you go for. All of these are on the right hand side of the motherboard, right angled facing outwards, for good cable management options straight out the grommets to the right hand side of where your motherboard will sit. M.2 support is also good. You've got 2 slots on this motherboard, one which is really neatly placed under the chipset cooler to keep your M.2 drive really nice and cool, and then you also have one which basically protrudes out of the motherboard, faces upwards to get direct intake airflow from the case, and they include a little support bracket that you screw on for this. I think it looks a little bit obnoxious with it sticking out, and would personally opt for the chipset mount, but you can use both if need be. One notable missing connection option here is the lack of a U.2 port. For most people this won't matter, and most people are probably going, James, U.2, who cares about that? U.2 is a super fast storage standard that just straight up hasn't been adopted. M.2 drives are way more popular, and PCIe drives are used for increased speed over M.2. I can't really knock ASUS for leaving this out, but if you've somehow got a U.2 drive that you need to use, perhaps look at the MSI motherboard, as I said, linked in the cards that I looked at yesterday, which does feature that port. I/O connectivity on this board is pretty good. If we look at the rear I/O, moving from the left to the right hand side, you've got a BIOS flashback button for flashing back your BIOS, moving it to a previous version, reverting overclocking settings if you badly screw something up. To the right of that, you've got 2 USB 2 ports, which are really good for backwards compatibility reasons. Plugging in old peripherals, for example, that just won't play ball with USB 3 and 3.1. You've then got a gigabit Ethernet connector, RJ45 of course. To the right of that, you've got 2 USB 3.1 Gen 1 ports, with 5 gigabits per second of throughput, the bottom of which can be used for plugging a memory stick in to update or roll back your BIOS. Once again, good for reverting overclocking settings, moving to a BIOS with less compatibility issues, or updating for bug fixes, or just those shiny new features that you're desperate to get your hands on. You've then got a further 2 USB 3.1 Gen 1 ports, once again 5 gigabits per second of throughput. Next up, you've got your antenna connections for your Wi-Fi and Bluetooth antennas, which come included in the box. The Wi-Fi antennas provide dual channel compatibility with 2.4 and 5 GHz bands for the latest routers and latest connectivity options, and also provide Bluetooth 4.2, which is a newer standard of Bluetooth, slightly more energy efficient, that kind of thing, but it isn't the latest Bluetooth 5.0, although I haven't actually seen Bluetooth 5.0 implemented on any X299 motherboards as of yet. To the right of that, you've got your two USB 3.1 Type A and Type C Generation 2 ports. Now, these are the ones everyone seems to associate with the super fast new USB 3.1 standard, because they've got that insane 10 gigabits per second of throughput. One thing to note here is that these USB 3.1 ports can actually be used for power, so if you want to charge your MacBook, you're a little bit stuffed, but can be used for super fast data transfer. And finally, to wrap up the I/O, we of course have the staple that is the audio connections, 7.1 3.5mm out, and then of course your optical audio output as well, for something like a TV sound system or a soundbar, that kind of realm. In terms of what's controlled by the chipset natively and what uses a controller, both the front panel USB 3.1 Gen 2 and the two rear panel USB 3.1 Gen 2 port are controlled by an AS Media controller. The front panel connector will dig into a PCIe X1 bandwidth. So once again, if you've got a CPU, with low PCIe lanes, you are going to have to watch out there. Once again, links to the manual with all the configs are in the description below. Moving on to the other front panel connectors, you've got two USB 3.0 headers for cases that support more USB 3 ports. One of these is at the bottom of the motherboard and one is at the side next to the power connections for better cable management routing options. You've of course got your 20 plus 4-pin motherboard power connector down the side of the board for providing motherboard power, and 8 plus 4-pin CPU power at the top of the board. Now, one thing to be aware, it uses an auxiliary 4-pin power cable given the higher TDP of these new X299 chips and better power delivery options in terms of overclocking. You just want to make sure you've got an additional auxiliary 4-pin power connector, as some power supply manufacturers are supposedly not including two CPU power cables. I know the Cooler Master power supplies I've looked at before, and XFX ones do include these. However, I saw someone on Twitter in a bit of an argument with Corsair's support over this, so just watch out, be wary, but Amazon or eBay is often the best place to go if you're looking for an additional cable. Next to the CPU power up top is an RGB header. Slightly unusual place for an RGB header, but it's fantastic to see an RGB header both at the top and the bottom for better cable routing and management options. If you want LEDs in the top and bottom of your case to be separate for different lighting effects, then this is really going to be useful to you. One gripe I have with this is that the connector is based on white plastic. I don't understand this. Other board manufacturers have made this black, and just really sticks out like a sore thumb. Everything else is a nice neutral black, dark grey aesthetic. Apart from this, it just sort of puts me off very slightly. The number of fan headers on this board is really nice. You've got two 4-pin PWM headers up the top, one down the right hand side, two at the bottom and two on the left under the I/O shield. Now, placing these in this way is really good for cable management options and making sure all your fans can be reached accordingly. If this isn't quite enough for you, ASUS actually have a header at the bottom of the motherboard which allows you to plug in a fan hub for plugging in even more fans, which is really a nice addition in my opinion. The bottom of the motherboard has the bulk of the I/O with a USB 2 header, USB 3 header. You've got your front panel audio connections and your front panel power and reset connections. You've got the fan hub header previously mentioned, and of course the 4-pin LED header. Also at the bottom here is a Q code display. What it'll basically do is display an appropriate hexadecimal code if there's a problem, which you can then cross-reference in the manual to see what the issue is, i.e. if it's not communicating with your RAM properly, it will show you a code, you check that up in the manual, and you can then see the issue without having to play a game of guesswork, unplugging and replugging things in order to try and solve a problem that you don't really know exists. If we touch on overclocking slightly, this board certainly isn't ASUS's flagship overclocking option, but is definitely capable. You can easily get speeds of 5 GHz, especially on these lower priced, higher clock CPUs, such as the i5 7640K that I had in for review. You can of course manually overclock in their BIOS, and they actually include some software both in Windows and in the BIOS called 5-way optimization. ASUS have touted this on the front of their motherboard boxes for literally years, and what it basically means is you can go into the motherboard BIOS, click a button, and it will automatically optimize your RAM speed settings, your cooling options, i.e. your fans. You can calibrate your fans in there, and of course apply an automatic overclock to your CPU. It works briefly, loosely in a way that I've shown on screen now with the pseudocode animation, or it references a set of presets which the clever ASUS engineers have designed for suitable and safe overclocks for the CPU that you have installed. Before I wrap this review up, let's take a deep dive into the performance figures. Now, I comprised a set of 3 tests. The gaming test I used was Project Cars, with the same race on both motherboards in the same weather conditions, and recorded the frame rates, minimum, maximum and average of the first 60 seconds using fraps. The results were indistinguishable. One motherboard had 1 FPS higher minimum, but then also had an average FPS that was 0.4, 0.5 lower. Really nothing too major going on there. The 3D Mark V strike was once again the same story. Very, very similar results indeed, as you can see on your screen now. And the Cinebench R15 was essentially indistinguishable on both the graphics and the CPU tests. This is actually quite reassuring to see, because a motherboard shouldn't directly affect performance, aside from if we're talking about overclocking. The motherboard really is there to provide you different I/O connectivity options, different design options. This design on this motherboard is incredible. It's one of the best design motherboards I think I have seen. The I/O balance is also really, really nice, and those are the things you'd be looking at motherboard rather than worrying about marginal performance differences. The BIOS is another huge factor that should really distinguish whether you choose to buy one motherboard or not. The ASUS BIOS is great. It's intuitive. I prefer MSI's very, very marginally, but the advanced mode on ASUS is just a bit better. It's got fan optimization, for example, which works fantastically. It boots into it really, really nice, and the Republic of Gamers splash screen, as stupid as it is, just looks really cool in my opinion. It's not garish, it's not bombardment of multiple colours. I think ASUS do a good job with the BIOS and a good job with the design, not only on the motherboard but also in the software that they include. So, what do I think of this motherboard to conclude? I went on a bit of a mini rant in my MSI X299 video about Intel's decision with X299 and the way it went. I can't agree with how Intel approached X299, and it's very much a knee-jerk reaction to a threat from AMD in terms of Threadripper that didn't yet exist. Now, I think this motherboard does a really, really great job of giving you the performance that you need, giving you the feature set that you need, the connectivity that you need, and a design package that is fantastic. I can only but praise ASUS on the way this thing looks. It is truly an incredibly designed motherboard. It's minimalistic, it's nice. It isn't the flagship overclocking board, but it isn't priced as the flagship overclocking board either. If I had to recommend you an X299 motherboard, both the ones I've looked at so far are good options, but design-wise, this takes it for me. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to smash that like button, follow my Twitter at GeekaWhat. One thing I failed to mention earlier is that this is the second time I've recorded a 30-minute session of speaking to the camera for this video. Recorded all the rest without any audio. Don't do that. I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, subscribe, and we'll see you next time in the next GeekaWhat video.